So, Chris, I decided to deep dive into the overall story of The Legend of Zelda through some YouTube videos
Oh,
um, that hopefully we'll have linked in the show notes for other people to check out because I have heard about for a long time that all these games are connected, even though I played like, I don't know, 6 or 7 Zelda games over the years, and I don't see how any of them are at all connected. So I tried to figure it out and thought that would be a great cold open. I'd watch a 15-minute video, summarize it, we'd chat, do a little banter, and then hours of my life got sucked into YouTube trying to figure this out. This will probably be a slightly longer cold open, but I did learn interesting things about the history of The Legend of Zelda. If you would
okay.
like to join me in this learning adventure.
Sure. I mean, I have heard that they're all connected also
Yes.
in some way.
Uh,
So,
There,
yeah.
there is a timeline. I will say
Yes.
it's not a linear timeline.
Oh, that's interesting.
Um, well, not. I guess it is somewhat linear. It's not a straight timeline like you might expect a history to be. Um, so,
Okay.
First off, I was going to put a spoiler warning in here for Ocarina of Time. Obviously, that's the game of the month that we're going to be talking about and talking about the history of all the Legend of Zelda games shortly. But there is a pretty cool twist in Ocarina of Time after you get the 3 gemstones and then go to the Temple of Time. There's a big scene and story developments that will be spoiled probably in multiple places throughout this episode. So if you don't want spoilers, you better go get those 3 gemstones first, then come back for the rest of this episode. Don't forget to go to the Temple of Time too, and
Yes.
you will be all set. I think
Yeah.
any other spoilers that we'll talk about probably aren't as critical as that one. Okay, giving them a second to find that pause button and run away if they want to, and here we go. So, as we saw in Ocarina of Time, there were 3 goddesses. This was pretty early in Ocarina of Time that,
Yeah.
kind of like a blue, a red, and a green goddess that represent power, wisdom, and courage. And they go and they create the big world that Legend of Zelda is set in. The kingdom is called Hyrule, but I honestly don't know what the entire world is called. I actually saw
I don't
in
think
some chat
we ever
forums,
do.
apparently in Wind Waker, they actually call it Earth a couple times,
Okay.
and have like the Big Dipper can be seen in the sky or something like that.
Hmm.
So maybe it's Earth at another time. Maybe it's just
A parallel
it's not
one?
important. Yeah, it's not that critical. So this is their big creation myth, and then we learn apparently a lot of this story that we're about to talk about happens in the game Skyward Sword, which I want to say was the Wii title that has been recently released again on the Switch, with a
Yes.
full-on remake or more than a port, I believe. Um, so in Skyward Sword, we learn that, and that is the first game in the Zelda chronology, is Skyward Sword.
Oh, really?
Um,
For in the actual history of it.
Yes. Yeah. All of the
Really?
timelines that we're going to be talking about stem
Yeah.
from Skyward Sword, which is
Oh.
not a game I played, but now a game that I
Yeah.
really want to play. In that, we learn that there is a force called Demise that is sort of the antagonist divine force to the goddesses. Goddesses are creating goodness, etc., power, wisdom, and courage. And Demise comes to balance the goodness with some evil, destruction, monsters, darkness, all those sorts of good and evil tropes.
Okay.
Um, so after the goddesses are done creating, they create the Triforce, 3 pieces representing power, wisdom, and courage. Demise, as represented in Ganon, will largely be centered on the Triforce of Power. And in this game, Ocarina of Time, Ganondorf is the representation of Demise, and he, of course, gets the Triforce of Power. Meanwhile, to keep the to yet again create more balance after we have the good goddesses, now we have the evil Demise. The god forces create, more so promote Zelda and Link into the heroes of this world. Zelda being the princess and wisdom, Link being the hero archetype and courage. And they are both like in Skyward Sword, I believe they are just mortal beings. But what
Hmm.
happens at the end of Skyward Sword is Demise, as he's being defeated by Zelda and Link, curses them into a cycle of reincarnation where his hateful spirit will continue
Ah.
to haunt them and throughout their multiple lives. So that to me is kind of the summation and kind of like the
Yeah.
best takeaway from this is we have this
It
recurring
sets up the.
pattern of
Yeah.
evil arising, Zelda and Link in various forms coming to save the day. And then the confusing things begin happening. So
Oh.
there is in the timeline. Next up is Minish Cap and Four Swords, not Four Swords Adventures, but
Ah.
Four Swords, and
Yeah.
they're basically just side adventures. Zelda and Link
Okay.
save the world from
Eh.
some sort of evil.
Eh.
Not really that important,
Yeah.
but they do come next in the straight line. And then we come to a civil war that happens off screen, and Ocarina of Time takes place immediately after. So we have the Zelda
Okay.
Cinematic Universe Civil War movie, and then we have Ocarina of Time.
Okay.
Um,
So that's still
so
early-ish on in the
yes,
chronology,
it is.
which is
It
okay.
it is incredibly pivotal. Pivotal. There we go. Like Skyward Sword is the origin, and Ocarina of Time is a second take on this. So
Okay.
again, spoiler warnings for Ocarina of Time.
Hmm.
Uh, but Link is sealed away for 7 years after you go to the Temple of Time with the three stones, because he needs to grow up so he can become powerful enough to wield the Master Sword and stop Ganondorf, which is the events of Ocarina of Time. At the end of the game, and I'm pretty sure I beat this game. I know I got to the final
Oh
battle.
yeah.
I often, in when I was young, would stop there. I guess in the sense like I don't want it to be over, but I'm pretty sure I did in one playthrough actually beat it. And we find out that in the storyline, Zelda sends Link back in time so he can relive his childhood. So he lost 7 years, and Zelda gives him back the 7 years by sending him back in time. Now that the world has been saved, Ganondorf has just been sealed away. He hasn't been destroyed, but everything's fine. That
Hmm.
surely isn't going to go wrong, and that causes a fractured timeline. Where, kind of back to the future style, we will now split
Oh
off
no.
into three directions.
Oh gosh. Okay.
Uh, so the first timeline is we follow Link. So Link goes back in time 7 years, but rather than just going back and being a child, he goes and he warns Zelda what is about to happen, and also the King of Hyrule, so they stop Ganondorf before he can rise to power. So he changes the future, which of
Wow.
course
Okay.
erases Ocarina of Time from his timeline.
And Doc
It
Brown gets
still exists.
arrested, and
Yes,
that.
yes, and then
Okay.
1.21 gigawatts, and that is after the 1.21 gigawatts and the lightning, we go to Majora's Mask, Twilight
Okay.
Princess, and Four Swords
Oh.
Adventures, and so that is the timeline where he went back in time and changed the future. Now let's rewind yet again and go back to Zelda sending Link back in time, but we're going to stick with Zelda this time. So Zelda's timeline continues, but now without Link. In fact, Ganondorf does eventually break free of his seals and is so powerful, but because Zelda sent Link back in time, Link is not there to save them. And so Ganondorf gains power, and the goddesses return and decide to flood the entire Hyrule Kingdom, possibly the entire world, and to stop Ganondorf. And then we have centuries later, Wind Waker occurs, where Link is finally
Uh-huh.
reincarnated into this world and has to stop the same Ganondorf from Ocarina of Time, but now in this watery world, which I really enjoyed that game. And that leads on to Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks. So those are the two timelines that split off
Oh
from
no.
here. But
Okay. Yeah,
in
we're only at two.
through, we're only on two out of
Yeah.
3.5 ish.
But that's interesting already that Twilight Princess is the Majora Mask path. I wouldn't have expected that, but
Yeah,
that's a whole nother thing.
yeah.
Anyway,
Did you play Twilight Princess? I did
I
not.
did. Yeah,
Oh
I
no.
quite liked it. So that's rather interesting. But anyway, yeah. Keep going. All right. 2 out of
So
3.
timeline three, we're almost there. So this is a hypothetical, I guess. I'm not 100% sure, but in this timeline, for whatever reason, Link is killed during the events of Ocarina of Time. Ganon is still sealed away, like he does enough to stop Ganon, but he
Uh-huh.
also dies in the process.
Okay.
Why? I don't know. but
Yeah,
but
that
this
timeline. This timeline's not
timeline,
making sense.
yeah, this timeline leads to the classic games. We next go to Links to the Past, Link's
Oh,
Awakening, Oracle of Seasons and Ages, Link Between Worlds, Triforce Heroes. The original Legend of Zelda is finally in the timeline, and Adventures of Link or Zelda 2 concludes that timeline for now, as of now.
ah,
And there's a brand
really?
new Zelda
Wow.
game that is just coming out, and I
Yeah,
have no idea where to put it, so let's not
yeah.
worry about that. Now, you might be saying, well, Josh, you forgot two of the most important Zelda
Uh huh.
games, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom.
Uh
Where
huh.
do they could go? So
That was my question.
so now we need to go back in history in the real world a little bit because all of this information was released by Nintendo. There were a lot of fan theories that got a lot of these components correctly. They always said that there was some actual timeline that they were working on back in Nintendo, but they kept it secret until 2013. And it honestly feels like they kind of slapped it together based on stuff they read
Yep.
on the internet.
Yeah.
But they released The Legend of Zelda Hyrule Historia, an official book that describes the Zelda timeline. That was in 2013 before
Okay.
Breath of the Wild. So
Yeah.
all we have is whatever leaks and references creators have made, as well as fan theories on where Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom take place. But it seems that no matter any of the three timelines that you follow, you they all converge into the new timeline, which starts with Breath of the Wild. And
Interesting.
basically, these are so far apart, thousands of years. The ridiculous amounts of time have passed that they all lead to the same place, I guess. And then you
Okay.
have Breath of the Wild with the follow-up Tears of the Kingdom, and then just to add a little more seasoning on this very confusing plate, Tears of the Kingdom involves traveling back in time, apparently. And where they travel to is very questionable. 'Cause do they travel back to like after Skyward Sword, or do they travel back just a few hundred years in time to something we haven't explored yet? But that is the Zelda timeline slash timelines. I hope you found it interesting. I'll give a shout out to the YouTube creator Zeltic, who had a very helpful and brief history that I am summarizing, as well as Ego NZ Digital, who had a very interesting take on their Zelda timeline video where they actually went in the chronological order of the games and included what fans were thinking at the time.
Oh my
As the
goodness.
first game came out, second game,
Yeah.
and then they started to build lore, and then the book came out and made it all official. So that was a very interesting, though quite a bit longer, explanation. And of course, The Legend of Zelda Hyrule Historia, which is still available for any true die-hard Zelda fans. Any questions?
No. No questions.
Okay, well, let's keep
Just
going.
maybe too confused. I don't know. Two brothers play a game. Two brothers play a game. Two brothers play a game. Then they will rate that game.
Welcome to Two Brothers Play a Game. I'm Josh.
And I'm Chris, and not as confused about Zelda as I am about Kingdom Hearts.
It's
That
true.
is
It's
my
true.
takeaway from all,
If
from all that we covered.
if learning what I learned about the Zelda history took me a couple hours to frame in my mind, then learning about Kingdom Hearts has taken me really a lifetime, but at least 10
Yeah,
hours on YouTube
or
watching videos,
game
still
lifetime.
not being sure.
I
Yeah.
I had to show my wife like all about Kingdom Hearts because we've gone to some Halloween parties at Disneyland, Oogie Boogie Bash that they have like Mickey, Donald, and Goofy in their Kingdom Hearts forms that you can get
Mhm.
photos with. So I'm like, oh, this is awesome. This is why. There's a great game. It's all this stuff. And like I was trying to explain it, and I'm like, there's no way for me to explain it. We're gonna find videos because it's confusing as heck. And we did, and we're like, everything is confusing. Like we just concluded with that, and like that's our running joke is like anytime we see a Kingdom Hearts thing, it's like this is going to be the most confusing thing. Oh, I know one thing that came up with it because I do like Kingdom Hearts. So I almost got
Mhm.
a wedding band that had like the
Mhm.
Kingdom Hearts symbol on it. And we kept joking if I got that, we would have the most confusing wedding ever because Like,
You start with the
yeah.
vows and then go back in time to find out what led up to the vows all
Yeah,
those
and
years
then
ago.
somebody will go missing and we have to go
Yep,
search for them. And then we find
at
out that they
least
were
three
there all
times.
along. Yeah. And that I'm really the spirit of myself. And yeah. Yeah. We would just have
Uh,
something like that.
I think my overall advice for which actually applies to both Kingdom Hearts and Legend of Zelda is enjoy the game as a
Yes.
self-contained item and just
Yeah.
don't worry about the rest of it. It's not
No,
worth
and
it.
that's exactly how I do Kingdom Hearts. Sometimes I worry about it, but sometimes I'm like, I don't care. It's Disney stuff and Sora's cool. I'm good. Like, yeah.
So we've got a bit sidetracked, but this is a podcast where we two brothers play a game we found on sale for Nintendo Switch, and then we talk about Kingdom Hearts instead. Except that currently we are playing titles from the Nintendo Switch Online Expansion Pass library, the big $50 a year package that includes N64, Game Boy Advance, Sega, Nintendo, Super Nintendo, and Game Boy Color. Whew. We discussed some of the
Oh, system.
smaller titles we individually checked out in the first half of the podcast. Then in the back half, we discuss and review the game or games of the month that we both played. This time, in case it wasn't clear already, we are talking about The Legend of Zelda, the
Kingdom of Heart.
Ocarina
Oh.
of Time. Oh, yes. We are talking about Kingdom Hearts 3 and explaining everything. Settle in.
No, but the classic Ocarina of Time, that is well known, is what we are reviewing. Yes.
So I have been talking for a while. How about you kick us off with what games you
Oh.
played this month?
So I did. Oh, I forgot to look up the exact title of one of them because I just keep calling it one thing. I might have to look it up while we're doing it. But one of the games that I tried was Doctor Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine on the Sega
Oh,
Genesis.
that sounds right.
And what's that?
That sounds right. Like the correct
Yeah,
title.
that one's the correct title. That one I know the title of. The other one
Ah,
is I have to slightly look it up while I talk about Mean Bean Machine. So Mean Bean Machine. I thought that I had played a little bit way back in the day. I feel like it was a um later Genesis game. You know, like it's in the Sonic universe. It's somehow connected to all of them, but like it feels like it came much later after Sonic 3, or that's what I was thinking. I don't know for sure. Didn't look it up. But felt a little bit of that way. Just Sonic Universe, you know, last years of Sega Genesis before they rolled out some of the next consoles is what I was feeling like. So I think I played it, but I'm not sure if I did in the past. It is a puzzle game. It's, Tetris style. You're matching, instead of matching blocks and having multiple blocks, it's a little more like Dr. Mario, where there's like the colored pills, and they can be dual colored or they could be all one color, and you're matching colors, and then that will do something against your opponent, which can be computer,
hmm
typically computer for the story's sake, and it's robots that Dr. Robotnik has sent out against you. There is not much story to it. Like that
hmm
supposedly was what it was.
Right, it's a puzzle game.
It's a puzzle game. I didn't like it.
Oh
Um,
no.
yeah, you would think that it'd be fun and just a simple type one. It There wasn't really a tutorial. Like it was a simple puzzle game, but at the same time, the things that they made it to be complex and different, it there was no way of knowing exactly what you were doing for
hmm
anything. So like I thought it's like, okay, if I can clear a bunch of them, because it wasn't just, in a line, you could do like L's, like they just all had to be connected by color, which was
hmm
fun. But you would think that the more that you would clear in whatever grid of that would cause more blocks to be put on your opponent's screen. There was no rhyme or reason to that. I didn't feel like. So I get a lot more blocks for just no reason. And this was like on easy mode. This wasn't even on a harder mode. And I
Right,
couldn't
the
clear the
trash
first
attacks that
stage.
get sent as you,
Hmm.
right? hmm
Yeah. So I couldn't clear the first stage no matter what I would do. It was it was very odd how it was all set up. So I don't feel like it was really set up well to try to go through. And that kept frustrating me. I just couldn't get really past it in a lot of
Makes
ways. So,
sense.
yeah. So,
I see that critics of the game criticize the gameplay's difficulty. It's noted on the Wikipedia
ah,
page as I was looking at
okay,
it. So
okay,
not alone in that.
okay.
Uh, One thing that's interesting before you go on to your next game is I always look at images of the games you're talking about because I haven't played them recently. Like you, I think I played this, way back when a couple times, but nothing significant. But I was like, wow, this game looks really familiar. Why does it look so
Yeah.
familiar? And in the Wikipedia, it does say, if you recall from my Nintendo and Super Nintendo games I played the last 2 months, I kept
Uh
raving about this
huh.
game called Puyo Puyo.
Yeah.
And Mean Bean Machine is a westernized version of Puyo Puyo that
Ah.
replaces the
Okay.
characters with Sonic the Hedgehog franchises
Oh. Okay.
characters. So it is the same gameplay, though with a new overlay and skin. And what I learned from playing, two or more, maybe three Puyo Puyo games now, is that it's really about the combos. Like just making a match does virtually nothing. What you need to do is you need to set
Mm,
up one match to trigger a second match, and if you can, a third match, and that's how you get the junk attacks on
the
your
things.
opponent.
Oh.
And the
Yeah.
games don't tend to explain that very
No.
well. If you just
No.
keep matching the easiest three or four in a row, you're going to lose, even though you're clearing stuff so quickly.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, so
There we
I,
go.
I might actually go and try this one myself in the future, just because I'm curious if my Puyo Puyo experience, which isn't very significant, will help me get past
I
that first level.
I think I mean I think so because there is no, like I said, there's no way to really know that, like
Hmm.
no intuition for it, other than like, yeah, that's great if you can do something like that, but it didn't seem like that was the key thing to the game to go against your opponent with. So yeah, it I'm glad I'm not the only one that found it difficult. It was a little bit unfortunately difficult for that.
Hmm.
So yeah, but that
How,
makes a lot
how
of
about
sense now.
how
Hmm?
about your second game? Did you find what it's called?
I did. I played on Game Boy Advance. It is Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Red Rescue Team.
Whoa, I don't even
I
think I
know
know anything about that.
that, and now you see why I had to look up the title, right? Because I just wanted to call
Hmm.
it like the Red Pokemon Mystery Dungeon. I'm like, that's not the full title. I should look up it again, like what it was. This game I did enjoy. It it was pretty fun. I was a little bit familiar with what type of game it was because I haven't played any the blue or the red exactly, but I know I played another, I forgot where I played a mystery dungeon or something like it with Pokemon. And so at least familiar to know this is not a traditional Pokemon game. This
Hmm.
is a little different, or maybe more than just a little different. It's different, but it's still in like an overhead travel through areas type game. It's involving Pokemon. It's involving battles. You're going through with that. In style fashion to how I go through games. I did not get super far, but I got far enough to know. Oh, I enjoy this. This is actually really fun. So you get to pick who you get teamed up with. So I picked Pikachu in this game. You
Hmm.
can pick Charmander, Bulbasaur, etc. as well. And then it's the story is you have become a Pokemon. You are a person, but somehow get transformed into a Pokemon. And it actually goes through like a personality test quiz to decide who you're going to be. So I was a Mudkip. I was a Mudkip
Hmm.
with a Pikachu, and running around. And the whole thing is you don't know what happened, you don't know what's going on, but you and Pikachu have formed a Pokemon rescue team, and you're going to go help other Pokemon. And there are Pokemon who are hostile towards you, and so you do battle them as you run around, which is it's real time battles, or real time enough. Like you sort of take turns doing attacks. Like you can't just like button mash and you're gonna keep attacking kind of thing. It's like attack, 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 kind of like that. But
When you
there's
move,
ways to
the
get,
enemy moves.
huh?
And when you move on screen, the enemy moves, right?
Yes, yes. So if you don't move, the enemy doesn't move, and etc. Um, and then you're going to on missions, rescuing Pokemon, exploring. There's a mention of you have to be careful, and like Mudkip is prone to being naive and so believing different things is what they said. So they're like, be careful. I didn't have it necessarily come up, but I'm sure it's something that plays out of like you could be led astray by a Pokemon that's saying, hey, go on this mission, and they trap you maybe or something. So I could see something like that. But overall, I see why the mystery dungeons of Pokemon have taken off in at least a little bit of a way, that they're fun and different enough from regular Pokemon games that you have some of that fun Pokemon feel and moves and enjoyment, but it's not about the catching. It's more about you are the Pokemon, now go out and go do things that Pokemon will do, and it's like that's really fun. That's different. So yeah.
So I was watching a little gameplay of this, and so far I don't see any rescuing happen. I just see Psyduck beating people up.
Yes.
Did you rescue any Pokemon?
Yes. So the first mission is a Caterpie got lost and separated from its mother Butterfree. So you were trying to find the Caterpie. And the Caterpie fell through something like a cave, thing, and fell down into this cave, and there's tons of bad Pokemon, and so the Butterfree asks for your help because she can't fend herself off against some of these bad Pokemon. So so you go and rescue the Caterpie right at first. So yeah.
Okay, that sounds fun. That also sounds like a game I might like to try.
Yeah.
The combat reminds me of an old PS1 game called Azure Dreams that I used to love. I believe it
Yeah.
was it is the gameplay of the game Rogue, where we get roguelike and roguelite games as well.
Hmm.
But I haven't played that one to know for certain. Any other games you touched on for the opening segment?
Those were the two that I tried besides
Okay.
our main one. Yeah.
So I have slowed down. I don't need
Oh.
a timer. I only have 3 games this time.
Oh.
Um, but I picked a few interesting ones.
Okay.
All in the Game Boy collection, though the last one was a
Hmm.
Game Boy Color game. The first two were original Game Boy games. And I played Castlevania Legends.
Hmm.
Um,
Yes.
I I've played a little bit of Castlevania games before, but never like one in its entirety. I was like, well, this will be a nice way to dip my toes in. However, I don't think this one is actually a Castlevania game. It's got the name on there, but a lot of
Hmm.
Game Boy titles and early Super Nintendo, Nintendo titles often were just branded a certain way to sell units, even if they
Hmm.
had nothing to do with that. Like um, there was a game that eventually got renamed Final Fantasy Legends. It wasn't a Final
Yeah.
Fantasy game, though. They just wanted to sell it
Oh,
that way.
I didn't know that
It
was
was
that.
a good
Okay.
game,
Yeah.
but so this is Castlevania Legends. Maybe the legend should have given me a warning that it was yet again kind of Castlevania, but it was more of a side-scrolling beat 'em up with a character that had a whip and was fighting off bats and other sorts of creepy crawlies that might be appropriate in a Metroid game. Or excuse me,
Okay.
a Castlevania game. There didn't seem to be, one of the iconic things of a Castlevania and Metroid game are traveling across a big map, encountering doors that you need upgrades for, going,
Hmm.
and backtracking to those places later on once you get the upgrades you need. And this seemed pretty linear. Go and beat some enemies up, work your way left to right, and it was fine. It had the limitations of the original Game Boy. It was a bit slow. Um, it was reasonably fun. I think it's only, I gave it a thumb up, but I think it's really only for retro game fans, maybe diehard Castlevania fans. But again, I don't think this is truly a Castlevania game. But I did enjoy my time and gave it one thumb up,
Okay.
even though it was a pretty short amount of time.
Okay.
Then I went to Kirby's Dream Land, which is another Game Boy
Hmm.
title that we actually had back in the day. And it is, as all, it's pretty much all Kirby games are, adorably cute, and it's a
Mm-hmm.
fun platformer. And unlike Castlevania Legends, this one is surprisingly fast paced and challenging from that perspective. That there are more enemies, they're all flying around the screen. You have to suck them into your mouth, shoot them out of your mouth, avoid them, and in other ways navigate around this busy minefield of opponents to deal with.
Yeah.
Pretty robust. Like Castlevania Legends felt very much like, okay, you've got a handful of assets that you're going to reuse in interesting ways for the next hour, and then I'll fight the final boss, and that's it. Each level in Kirby's Dream Land felt very unique and distinct. The music was much more engaging. This felt like people put a lot of time into Kirby's Dream Land. I did find the controls a bit frustrating to learn. Sometimes I need to jump, and if you hold the up button too long, then you start floating upward, which is a different control scheme and created other issues. So I had trouble with that, but I imagine with a little practice I could have learned it and worked my way through that. One thing of note for both of these games, Castlevania Legends and Kirby's Dream Land, is I often have been complaining about when I play these retro games that there's not really any checkpointing. You die, you get hit,
Yeah.
you get set back to the start of the level, and that's always so frustrating to me because I don't want to play the first 1 minute of a level 10 times until I can get to the next minute of content and then have to play that 10 times. But both of these games, Castlevania Legends and Kirby's Dream Land, had checkpointing. If you ran out of life, then you just went back basically one screen. And I think in both games you had a limited number of lives before you before you had a game over and start back from the beginning of the game. But it didn't set you back nearly as far, which is just
Hmm.
like I thought that was a memory limitation keeping other games from doing that or something to that accord. But these classic games had checkpointing like you'd find in a modern game. So
Hmm.
it makes me even more judgmental of the games that didn't have this because it was a possibility at the time, apparently,
Yeah.
even on the Game Boy. But the modern emulators have the save states and other ways to reverse time, so largely you can not worry about it too much. But it
Including the
was a minor
Switch.
frustration.
Yeah.
So I also gave Kirby's Dream Land one thumb up.
Okay.
Worth checking out more universally because it is a fun and very cute adventure that I think you'll have fun with for at least a half hour, if not longer.
Yeah.
Even with the control frustrations, that probably just kept it from being a two thumb up
And it
game.
was the first one. I mean, yeah. They
Right,
were
right.
trying it at first and then they perfected it later on. So, yeah. Makes sense.
And then I played Mario Tennis, and this is the one I spent the most time with. This was
The
came out 1 year after the Game Boy Color Mario Golf game. Again, Mario Tennis for the Game Boy Color, not
Okay.
Mario
Not
Tennis
the
for the
N64.
N64, which is yeah came out at the same time, but it was a completely different game. Very confusing. It's by the same developer as the Mario Golf people, Camelot, and it was differently organized. Like I could see so many of the things that were carried over from Mario Golf to Mario Tennis, but this time you were a student in a tennis training school and you were working your way up through the ranks, and that provided a little more framework than the Mario Golf games. I mean, in
Okay.
the end, it's you're trying to be the best golfer or
Yeah.
tennis player
Oh, yeah.
in the area. But I enjoyed the little extra framework that the school aspect had. It
Okay.
kind of explained why you were here and doing this a little better. And you start at level one and you work your way up doing training missions or doing matches, getting experience points, and then putting those points into things like speed or power or control. At first, this ended up being very tricky because at level one, you have no stats in anything. And so I couldn't actually aim the ball to the left or right more than like a foot. So effectively, every time I hit it, no matter what I tried, I just hit it straight back to the center of the court where the other
Ah.
person was. And so we just get into a battling match of hit it at each other over and over and over and over again until one of us missed. Or as became my strategy, I accidentally hit them accidentally in quotes there. So that counted for me if I hit them with the
Yeah.
ball. So that first match was pretty rough and time consuming. These are full length tennis matches, best of three sets, which is composed of like 13, up to 13 games, each game being composed of like four or more rallies. So it takes a while to get through these matches when you have absolutely no stat points in anything. But once
Yeah.
I finished my first match and got a couple upgrades in control, it played a little more like a tennis game that I was familiar with,
Okay.
where I could actually like think through a strategy of hit left, stand back, hit right while they're still going left. Okay, I scored. Um, but overall, I was having a ton of fun with it. This is a game that I actually might return to. I hope to return to, and I decided to give it two thumbs up, which is actually higher than I gave Mario Golf. I enjoyed my time with it and want
Okay.
to level up more. So,
Cool.
are you ready to talk about the game of the month this time, Ocarina of Time?
I am ready.
All right. So, I will kick it to you. Can you tell us, can you describe Ocarina of Time for our listeners?
So I am ready means I've got to explain it. Gotcha. Um, it is, of course, a Legend of Zelda game. So it revolves around Link, our hero, Zelda, the princess, and the quest that Link is put on is given by the princess, and it's to save Hyrule, the land that they are in. The I mean, the story is pretty uh fleshed out from the beginning, which I feel like isn't always that way from Zelda, but uh there's dreams that Link is having, there's kind of predictions and different stuff happening with the world, and Ganondorf is this main guy that is not good and seems to want to kidnap the princess, although that's not known quite at first. It's just a prediction, and so Link is summoned by the Great Deku Tree to go help the princess. And even though he's been amongst forest elf people for ages, and so he's venturing out, gonna go try to save the world and Princess Zelda from evil Ganondorf. I was
Oh,
trying not to
very
spoil
good.
too much of it, but there we go.
I mean, I pretty much already spoiled the entire game in the opening
Yeah, I know.
segment.
There's an
It is,
Ocarina Evolve that you get to play songs on it to unlock different things. Hence why it's Ocarina of
yeah,
Time. Yeah, time
and there's
travel's
time travel
involved.
as well.
Yeah.
So that
There's
is
an
where the
older
name
Link
comes
that you
from.
get to. There's a younger Link you zap back to. Yep, that's yeah.
So this game, and this might be a little bit of a punch to the gut. It was when I read it, is over 25 years old, which
Oh,
is
that's a
just
little bit.
alarming.
Yeah, yeah. No, but I
Um,
do remember being young enough. Like I remember being I'll just say somewhat of a teenager when it came out. Yeah. What in playing it? Yep. But yeah.
and it was also Zelda's first foray into 3D on the
Yeah,
N64. First
that's right.
N64, first
Mhm.
3D Zelda. So has a lot of it was kind of a pivotal game in both Zelda history, as we talked about earlier, and the Zelda game history, as well as
Mhm.
gaming history in general. I mean,
Yeah.
this game will frequently be listed among the best 100 games of all time.
Oh yeah.
Ocarina of Time, believe. But
And I think
let's
sales-wise
talk
just
about.
did huge
Oh yeah,
sales as well. Yeah. So,
I think part of that was that the N64 library was so slow in fleshing out that, any good game on the N64 sold a ton of copies because people had consoles they
yeah.
wanted games for.
But I mean I
Uh,
think it was also a time that there just wasn't a ton in general like it. So, yeah, I think
right.
it drew people to the N64 for it. But yeah. Anyway, moving
Uh,
on.
let's go to presentation. How'd you like the look and sound of this game?
I was impressed actually for the look, for
Really?
it being an N64 game, because some of the other ones we've played, we've said we haven't been as impressed with, and I have put aside, it's all polygon based. I get it. It's not going to have the nice smooth graphics that our modern games do. But I actually was impressed. Like there was a lot more. Um, I don't want to say detail. There's just a lot more that was easily seen as what it is, and there's a lot more appearance to all the characters, more than I thought that there was going to be. That kind of impressed me. I think there's a lot that they did. I mean, the expressions are kind of simple in some ways to do because it's I know how they roughly do it for computer animation back then, and it is simplified. Like they got basically pictures on them, but still to actually do that and like animate it, I thought was great. Um, I I was a little impressed by it. Yeah.
Nice. I I will caveat that generally when I'm talking about these games that we're playing, I'm viewing them with modern lenses. Obviously, this game was
Hmm.
an incredible masterpiece at the time and looked
Yeah.
amazing at the time. Uh, so any of my criticisms, please, tack on by modern standards to the end, which
Yeah.
isn't a very fair criticism, but it's nonetheless the one that I'm making because it is up against modern games in terms of where do you want to spend your money and time right now.
Hmm.
Um, so I personally really dislike the presentation of Ocarina of
Okay.
Time as I'm returning to it. I found it kind of drab and the world was so empty. Again, probably limitations of the hardware. Obviously, people put a
Hmm.
ton of work into this, but the color palette felt like it suited the story with kind of that dark, stormy. There's trouble on the horizon, kind of muted color scheme, but it also left me feeling not very visually interested in this game. The way that they reuse textures over and over again, it was so clear. Like you'd look at a wall and it was just like wallpaper placed onto it in a dungeon. I was like, oh, that's the dirt wallpaper, and now we're over to the city
Hmm.
where we've got the brick wallpaper, and that I found it very unenjoyable to move about this world, which was to me so empty. Um, I even just going back to, not trying to compare it to like Skyrim or Fallout, which had a big place chock full of goodies to explore, or even Breath of the Wild.
Hmm.
Um, but compared to moving around A Link to the Past, an older game than this, I think 5 years old or something like that. There was just so much more to do in Link to the Past, moving from screen to screen. And here I would point myself in the direction of the castle and then kind of look away from the screen for a good minute while I walked the rest of the way from here to there because there wasn't even bushes to cut down half the time.
Hmm.
Um, the enemies were repetitive, that the skeletons would pop out of the ground and like I guess I could fight you, but there's really no reason. I could just run around you instead. Um, so I did find I'm getting into gameplay a little bit, but I did find the world a bit empty and also kind of drab. And I did like the sound design though. Some of the music in here,
Music.
and that's probably
Yeah.
where I got the most nostalgia from, is the tunes that were playing. And then interestingly, some of the dungeons, all the Link to the Past, etc.
Hmm.
dungeons have music in them. Some of the dungeons here just had kind of a soundscape for immersion, spooky cave sounds and things like that. No music, and it did make me miss the music in those areas, but I think it also added a lot of ambiance. So I think sound design they really knocked it out of the park.
Hmm.
And visuals I criticize mostly based on the hardware, I think, rather than the work that went into this game. How about gameplay? Did you enjoy the gameplay of Ocarina of Time?
I did for the most part. There there's some translation problems with controls with
Mm,
the Nintendo Switch, but I in with how this game went in that way, I think it's more fault in the port, and they're just I feel like that they're not taking the time to really figure out how to um, move over the controls to Nintendo Switch controls as much. But I got used to it really fast, which was good, and that was more than a lot of other the N64 games that we've been playing, and so made me glad and very um and something, I don't know where I was going in that sentence, so I'm gonna just say like I enjoyed playing the game a lot more than I did and more than I thought I would, because going into it I was a little apprehensive about the controls and just thinking like this may not quite be the controls that I remember, or they may not, you know, be great based on the Nintendo Switch, but it actually turned out to be okay for me. So, yeah.
Nice. Um, I um, I have a lot of I try to give this game a lot of grace as the first 3D Zelda and one of the pivotal games that moved the entire gaming industry into the 3D space. But as with all games from this era, the camera is a chore to control,
Mm-hmm.
and that was frustrating. You have one button that determines your camera control, and all it does is it turns the camera to face the same direction as you, which
Mm-hmm.
for the most part doesn't happen automatically like in a more modern game where the camera is trying to be where it needs to be and you can have a wide range of control. So this was just very limiting, which, you know, that is okay if it isn't really impacting how the gameplay is going. But I often was like, jumping in the wrong direction, running in the wrong direction because my camera was facing the wrong way and I couldn't see what was going on. And so it took this game that was really, from a story perspective, painting me out to be this cool hero that was going to save the day. But then from a gameplay perspective, Zelda's got to stop. He's got to turn slowly. He's got to line up his jump. He's got to move his camera. Okay, now he can jump. Okay, now he needs to stop, be intentional, turn the direction you're going, move the camera, and just like it added all these steps into being the cool hero that uh, took me out of the game a little bit more than I would have
Okay.
liked. In addition, the same button that's the camera control is also the targeting button, which definitely was necessary. And I like the visual dynamics when you're locked onto an enemy and you get to strafe around them and raise your
Mm-hmm.
shield and fight with the
Flip.
sword. Like that was very cool.
Yeah.
Um, but sometimes I would be trying to lock onto somebody and instead it would be operating the camera. And it again required you to stop and make sure that Navi flew over to the enemy so that you could hit the camera button to lock on. Of course, Navi's going to chime in with the same tip that it gives for every single enemy.
Yep.
So, like I remember there was Dodongo that I fought in the second dungeon, and these little lizard things, and it was a very helpful tip. You lock on, you hit the Navi button, and she'd be like, "Oh, they're gonna explode after they're defeated. Watch out!" I'm like, "Oh, thanks, Navi." And then the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one. Just like, okay, I got it the first time. You don't need to remind me every 5 seconds that they're about to explode.
Well, and for
Um,
a while,
but
Navi, if you talk to her, and I think we kind of knew Navi, the way Navi was going to be going into the game, but still was more annoying than I remember, because there. I mean, I'm just going around and like, and hey, listen. I'm like, okay, something's happening. He's like, hey, we should go save Princess Zelda. Yeah, thanks, gotcha. Like, that's I think that's what you're doing, And then like a minute later, like, hey, listen. Okay, what's happening? We should go to Princess Zelda. Yes, great. Thank you, Navi. I didn't. You didn't need to say anything. Like, yeah.
there was one moment that I was actually surprised that Navi was more helpful than I remember Navi being in the first game. I was running around the Stone People's village, and I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
how do I progress? I know I want to go like knock out the boss from this mountain dungeon, get the bombs, that sort of thing. But I was like, I couldn't figure it out. And then Navi, hey, listen to me, and I pressed the button, and at first she was just like, "Oh, we should go talk to Sarah. I think it's Sari,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but your elf friend from back in the elf village." And I was like, "Okay, thanks, Navi. Yeah, we're friends." And then I realized that that was actually telling me I needed to go back to that village now to progress this quest that I was on, which was very counterintuitive. But at least they put in that slight helper to get you
Yeah.
thinking about going back because you need to get a song so that you could remove the depression of the stone people by
Yes.
making them dance,
Yes.
which is very silly. A
Uh-huh.
lot of the Zelda games from here on out and
Yeah.
earlier are very strange and kind of have this interesting sense of humor that is very novel. Was the control buttons that you were having trouble with the way that they assigned the C buttons to the thumbstick?
Yep. That was major.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, because originally on the N64 controller they were just buttons, and now it's your
Mm-hmm.
right thumbstick pressed left, right, up, or down, and it's very sensitive. Like I would press
Mm-hmm.
down to pull up my slingshot, and then you release the button to fire the slingshot. In this case, I release the thumbstick. But if I gave it just a little bit of a left or a right, it would switch tools rather than fire the slingshot,
Mm-hmm.
which is just like "Argh."
Yeah, and
Definitely
that's
could have
where
used a little tweaking there.
well, I wish that the ports again were things that you could like slightly customize them. Like you've got the configuration menu in all these ported retro games, and I just wish that you could say like, hey, switch the C pad to the actual like directional pad on the
Hmm.
controls, but they don't do that. So
Hmm.
yeah.
I get it because that's what you had to work with, and also I feel like I would
Yeah.
have adjusted those tolerances a bit because I was clearly
Hmm.
pressing right and maybe like 95% right, 5% down, and you thought down was what I wanted.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm with you. That happened to me a lot.
Bummer.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not the best port. It
No.
is a pretty direct port of the N64 game. I don't know of any updating that happened in here. Even
Yeah.
the TV sizes of that day, I think it's like
Uh-huh.
3 by 4 or something like that, 4 by 3, uh, is in effect. So you have the black bars on either side of the Switch's widescreen format, which is it's just like it's such an important game in video game history that I feel like it could have used a little more TLC, even though it's just a port for
Yeah.
a big collection.
Yeah.
But it's okay. Like if you wanted that original N64 feel, you got it for better or worse. How about story? How'd you like the story of Ocarina of Time?
I did like the story. It there were things that I didn't remember. Like I thought you'd jump into some things a lot sooner, and I didn't. But overall, um it like right off the bat, it's an intriguing story enough because there's there's a difference in, and maybe this might be coming from playing so many other Zelda games, though I will say, but there's more of a connection with Link to what's going on in the world, or like the fact that you're among a people group is pretty cool. Like it's not just your uncle, it's not just your you're by yourself and jumping into the whole adventure. It's there's a community you've been part of, and there's it expands out into the mystery of the world. I kind of liked how it did that at the beginning. I liked that there was Ganondorf, and it's not just Ganon. It's not jumping too far into the lore. It really was a bit of an introduction into the overall story that we went over at the beginning of this podcast, but it really was something like that that made it interesting to me. So um, I I liked it. I liked that deep dive into the beginnings of the Zelda franchise in a much later game. Yeah.
It's interesting because we played the original Nintendo Legend of Zelda, we
Hmm.
played some Link to the Past, now we're into Ocarina of Time, and watching the game evolve over that probably decade or more of time, maybe 15 years of Legend of Zelda, which basically had no the Nintendo one had
Yeah.
basically no story except there was probably a few paragraphs in the paper booklet that came with the
Yep.
game to Link to the Past, where there were limited chunks of story. Like you had enough to keep you going, but they really didn't spend a ton of time on that. It was more about I think that's the general design philosophy of the Zelda games in general is gameplay first. Hence why we
Hmm.
have this messy story.
Yeah.
that we had to fumble our way through at the beginning, to Ocarina of Time, where they went all in on the storytelling.
Hmm.
We wake up with prophetic dreams. There's a giant sacred tree calling us back to adventure. Why didn't Link have a fairy when he was born, while the other his peers all had fairies already? And then Navi gets sent to you by the Deku tree to guide you and to tell you to listen. Um,
Constantly.
and so
Yeah.
constantly. And so like that was very novel for Legend of Zelda, but it was also very well done in general.
Hmm.
Kind of like you, because I think I was coming at it from a Link to the Past perspective when I was going to play this. I was like, okay, I'm going to play like the first 3 or 4 dungeons, and that will give me enough of a feel for it. And so I run through the starter village, get my sword and shield, go face the first dungeon, knock it out in like 45 minutes to do the whole thing. And then I'm like, okay, we'll go chat with Zelda at the castle, then I'll be on to the second dungeon. Except first you need to break into the castle, then you need to do a stealth mission, then you need to talk to all the
Hmm.
people in the village earlier, and then you need to talk to Zelda, which is like the story part that I was expecting. I'm like, wow, there's a lot more story and talking in this game than any other Zelda game,
Yeah.
which did kind of slow the action down in a way I didn't
Yeah.
like, but also was like, I do appreciate the story that I got in exchange for slowing me down. Um, it definitely could use a little refinement, but I think it was a a cool choice to make, even if it was a little bit slower and took me
Hmm.
like 2 hours to get from the first dungeon to the second dungeon. And I didn't even make it to the third, but though I think it's a smaller, like a half hour between the second and the third dungeon, though I can't remember because there's so much of this game that apparently I forgot.
Yeah.
On
Oh
top
yeah.
of all the little side adventures, hunting down all the creepy spiders and things like that, which could fill more hours of time if you wanted to, and probably needed a guide to do that. Um, so I overall like the story a lot. Do you have any final thoughts before we rate the game?
Yeah.
Um, I think the only thing I'll add is I do have a lot of complaints about Ocarina of Time, but I definitely didn't hate my time with the game. I just suspect it could have been better, and there were so many Zelda games that hit the mark a lot. More than this one, both before with like Link to the Past and afterwards with your Breath of the Wild and all those games that came way after. Um, but I also have to acknowledge like this is a game that sits in video game history. Yeah,
Hmm.
so it's like it's a very important game. And also, I'm not 100% sure how much a modern player going back to Ocarina of Time would have fun, without a nostalgic tie to the game.
Maybe.
I,
Yeah.
I don't.
Because like it depends on the story, how much they know of the story. Um, and I do feel like once I got the ocarina, that was a little bit more fun
Mhm,
to bring out the ocarina at times. Like that was a big gimmick of this game. I think it was ocarina, hence the name. But
mhm.
I feel like that's something to yeah have.
I there's a part of me that thinks, well, if I didn't like this port, then obviously what I want is a full remake. Remake the game, flesh it out a little bit more, and then put it into the Breath of the Wild engine or one of the other newer Zelda
Mm,
engines,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and like that would be really cool, and I would be into it. But also, do I want to take away from all the new Zelda games that they're putting out to revisit this Ocarina of Time in a remake? And I'm like, they're probably better off just continuing to make new games and kind of letting
Mm-hmm.
this one go as important, but maybe not as replayable as other games. And it might be better to move on to a modern title. Um, so I have a lot of fond memories of this game. I don't think it
Yeah.
quite lived up to my very high expectations coming in. Do you want to rate it first, or shall I?
I will let you do it. I think I'm not quite sure where I'm leaning towards yet.
So I definitely came into this game thinking that it would be a two thumbs up, no problem. There'd be some N64 rough edges, but the frustrations just kept building up and up and up, such that I had to knock it down to one thumb up. I I respect this game a lot, and I think it is much better, like even as is much better without the nostalgia, without the history, is definitely a one thumb up game, but I just can't give it that second thumb up because of the rough edges.
I
Uh,
I was actually leaning towards one thumb up too, but I was trying to decide if I wanted to give it two. I think it's the same. Some of the reasonings for where you're going into the game with the two thumbs up. I will give it one thumb for some different reasons. It wasn't with the the presentation for me. It wasn't all the controls, but I think the story's great, but it's not as concise because they had to pack a lot into it, and so some of their explanation of the story took me away from it. I wish it were more spread out because sometimes I would just skip through as fast as I could, and that was partly of like I know what the story is already, so that may be a bad reasoning to give one thumb up, but it's like I wish that that had been more spread out or there's a little pieces like and yeah, we're comparing this, or I'm going to compare this to a modern Zelda game, but like Breath of the Wild, at least it's like every time you took those photos, you got a little bit of a piece of the story. And that wasn't a long, setting of that piece. It just was enough to get it and move on. Um I felt like, and this one was like you would get dialogue and dialogue and dialogue and dialogue and dialogue and dialogue, and you just had to keep going to different pieces of the dialogue before
Also,
moving
the
on.
dialogue speed was just way too slow,
It
and
was
there was no
and that's what bothered
adjustment.
me too. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and sometimes you could speed it up and sometimes you couldn't, and that bothered me. So it's the story's good, but there's sometimes that they told it well and sometimes that they didn't, and that's where I'm like, yeah, someone who's never played this and going back to do it, I don't know. But I will say the one thumb up still is with like again the gimmicks of the game, the tools that you get, the ocarina, that is fun, that is interesting to have, like learning songs, having stuff like that. um that I think was one of the first to really like do some things like that, and so I think that could be fun to play, so one thumb up. Yeah. Very long explanation for the one thumb up, but there we go. Yeah.
And so the next question is Ocarina of Time, this port, worth playing for anyone with the online pass? Does it age well? Is it still fun? And for that, I don't think it ages well, to be clear. I
Mm,
do think it's still fun. I think the dungeons were
okay.
a lot of fun. The story is good, though again, delivered a little slower than I would like. And with the historical value of this game, I would say it's worth playing, kind of with the asterisks of, you know, people coming at it from that historical or retro gaming perspective
Yeah.
will like this game the most. How about you? Do you
I
think this is worth going back for?
I think it is too. I have again a little bit of different reasoning because I have always liked A Link to the Past more than
Hmm.
maybe almost any other Zelda game. That might be. I like Breath of the Wild a lot, and I do like Tears of the Kingdom, but I and I haven't played all the Zelda games, but yeah, Link to the Past is always my favorite. Um, so even having like back in the day playing Ocarina of Time, I still was like, oh, Link to the Past still great. So going into it that way, I didn't, going into this again, I didn't have high expectations for it again, and I think it actually lived up to it. So it to me it aged a little bit more, and I think I just had maybe low expectations. So it aged fine. It was fun. That I'm like, yeah, I think someone should check this out. Even for nostalgia factor, it I think it went pretty well. So,
Oh, we got to rate nostalgia factor separately in our system.
oh, for
That's the
checking
next
out, no,
one.
I'd say yeah, it's worth it.
So for nostalgia factor, does it bring back fond memories if you've played it before, and does it live up to the memories you have of it? I think I'm not going to give it the point for nostalgia
Oh,
factor for myself
okay,
because it did my rose-colored glasses were very rosy, and this presentation was a little drab and clunky.
okay,
So I'm gonna knock it on the nostalgia factor. How about you?
okay. Now I give it a point for that actually.
Okay.
Um, I Yeah, I think that was a little bit of my explanation of like A Link to the Past, super great. That's still my top nostalgia factor one so far that we've done. Um, I didn't have high things, high praise going into it just from my memories. I enjoyed playing it in the past, but I enjoyed it as almost as much again, and so that was enough for me to say, yeah, nostalgia factor still good.
Nice. So that will give Ocarina of Time a 3.5 out of 6,
Okay.
which is a pretty respectable
Mm-hmm.
score, and it feels right. Like for a
Yeah.
game as important of Ocarina of Time to have given it a less than a 3 would have been disappointing to me, even though I was the one that rated it low in some
And
places.
if you're listening and you wanna round it up, that goes to a 4. If you want to keep it more on the 3 side, you keep it the 3 side. There you go. Yeah.
So that is our podcast for today. Coming up next, we have yet another Chrono Trigger recap pod. We unfortunately really built up Magus's castle as the cool part of the game, and we still have a lot of game to get through. But
Yeah,
there's still
that's
lots of
kind of the
good stuff.
halfway
Lots of
point.
good stuff still ahead.
Yeah.
After that, we've got we're continuing our Legend of Zelda, and we are going about 1.5 years in the real world timeline forward to Majora's Mask.
Mhm.
Still in the same engine, still on the N64. Probably going to be a lot of the same frustrations, so we probably won't have to revisit too many of those. But it'll be interesting to see, like, not only how the game progressed, but also did they were they able to work out any of the kinks? Z targeting work a little bit better, or do the camera functions feel better as you go about? Like, did they grow into the space a little bit in that year and a half that they developed Majora's Mask? And man,
Well,
games came out fast back in the day.
yeah, but I'll even point out you're saying that from a perspective of you and I, neither of us played it before.
Correct.
So
I
this is going
know
to
a
be all new.
handful of things about it.
Mhm.
That
Me too.
there's a creepy moon. There's obviously masks. From my background history, I know this takes place in a separate dimension, a parallel world from the normal Hyrule we spend time in, and that we're going to be doing a Groundhog's Day type thing where we go back in time and
Mhm.
we have to do it over and over again to save the world eventually. So I am interested. People love Majora's Mask even more than
Yeah.
Ocarina of Time. So
Yeah.
I am interested to explore it for the first time, and I really hope they sanded some of those rough edges. But
I
I
hope
kind of
so
doubt
too.
they got to it in a year and a half. But who knows? Who knows? Let's find out next time. You can send us questions to twobrothersplay.a game@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter or X at twobrothersPAG, also at twobrothersPAG on YouTube, where Chris does some live streams every now and again, as well as having
Yeah,
usually a playthrough of the game of the month. So if you want to see a little Ocarina of Time, is that up there, Chris?
that is up there. Yeah.
Nice. So you can see some gameplay and follow along. You could also listen to our podcast on there if you prefer it over traditional podcast apps.
Yeah. With a little bit of
Uh,
video. A little bit.
oh, what's that? Oh, I see a little alert on my screen that says Chris has something to say to us. Let me hit the C button and see what it is.
Hey, mountains are nice.
This is the life.